You need to watch this if you crave chills down your spine. Welcome to Soul Studios. Here, true crime meets the unknown. Suspense lurks in every shadow, and supernatural forces whisper from the dark. We craft chilling, edge-of-your-seat short stories inspired by the eerie, the unexplained, and the most haunting mysteries. 3 new stories drop every week, each one darker than the last. Are you ready to step inside? Subscribe now before the next story finds you.
In this chilling true-style tale, a family moves into an old New Jersey home and discovers a single children's book left behind. A small detail that quickly unravels into something far more eerie. Strange noises echo from the attic. Books begin appearing around the house, and their daughter starts speaking of a man who reads to her at night. Someone no one else can see. As the mystery deepens, they uncover a long-forgotten chapter of the home's history. One that refuses to stay buried. If you enjoy psychological horror, true-style hauntings, and stories that linger long after the lights go out, subscribe to Soul Studios now. Because some stories aren't made up, they're waiting to be heard. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when the Harper family arrived at their new home on Goffle Hill Road in Hawthorne, New Jersey. The house, a 2-story Dutch colonial with a gambrel roof, had been vacant for years before Daniel and Rebecca Harper bought it at a foreclosure auction. With peeling white paint and an overgrown yard, the house looked a bit neglected, even eerie. As their car rolled into the gravel driveway, Daniel glanced up at the attic's half-moon windows, which peered out like vacant eyes. He felt a brief chill but shook it off and stepped out to help his wife and daughter. Rebecca unbuckled their 6-year-old daughter Lily from the back seat. Lily hopped out, clutching her favorite stuffed bunny, and gazed up at the tall old house with a mix of excitement and uncertainty. "What do you think, honey?" Rebecca asked, squeezing Lily's hand. Lily offered a small smile and shrugged. It was bigger than their last home, and a lot older too. They carried a few boxes up to the broad front porch. Daniel fumbled with the large brass key the realtor had given them and unlocked the hefty wooden door. It opened with a drawn-out groan. Inside, the air was stale and cool. Sunlight from the late afternoon cast long beams through the foyer's dusty windows, illuminating floating specks. The layout was classic. Living room to the left, dining room to the right, and a hallway leading back to the kitchen. Against one wall, a wooden staircase led to the second floor. The house was empty, all furniture removed, but hints of former occupants remained in the form of stray items and old curtains. Lily wandered into the living room, her footsteps echoing on the hardwood. Built-in bookshelves stood empty against one wall, except for a single object lying on the middle shelf. "Mommy, look," Lily said, reaching for it. It was a large, thin hardcover book with a green cover, coated in dust. Lily wiped the dust with her sleeve, revealing the title, Goodnight Moon. It was a well-worn children's bedtime storybook. Rebecca exchanged a puzzled glance with Daniel. "That's odd. The house was supposed to be cleared out," she murmured. Daniel took the book, flipping through the pages. "Maybe the previous owners left it behind," he suggested softly. The thought of a children's book remaining in an empty, foreclosed house gave Rebecca a slight uneasy feeling, though she forced a smile for Lily's sake. Lily hugged the book to her chest. "Can we read it tonight?" she asked. Rebecca nodded, brushing dust off the cover. "Of course, sweetie. It's a classic." They continued exploring. In the hallway by the stairs, they encountered a door that was locked shut with a large padlock. A faded sign hung from it, reading, "Do not enter." Daniel jiggled the handle, but it didn't budge. "That must be the attic," he said, remembering the listing mentioned a third-floor attic space. It struck them as strange that it was so securely locked. "Why can't we go in there?" Lily asked, peering at the mysterious door. Daniel tried to sound casual. "Probably just storage or something not safe. We'll find out later, after we settle in." Rebecca frowned slightly at the ominous sign and padlock, but let it be. They had plenty of other work to do and assumed they'd get the attic open eventually with the realtor's help or a locksmith. With that small mystery noted, The family went upstairs to choose bedrooms and start unpacking for their first night in the house. That evening, after a day of unpacking and cleaning, the Harpers tried to make their first night as cozy as possible. Without their furniture yet, they improvised a little camp-out in the living room with pillows and blankets. A gentle rain pattered against the windows as Rebecca opened Goodnight Moon to read Lily a bedtime story by candlelight. Rebecca's voice was soft and soothing as she read the familiar lines. In the great green room, there was a telephone and a red balloon. Lily listened, snug under one arm, her eyes growing heavy. Daniel sat nearby, the simple rhyme calming him too. When the story ended, Lily was nearly asleep. Rebecca closed the book, and as she did, she noticed neat cursive handwriting on the inside back cover. It said, "Property of Hawthorne Orphanage." She showed it to Daniel silently. They exchanged confused looks. Neither had heard of an orphanage in town. Daniel shrugged, whispering, "We can ask around or look it up tomorrow." Yawning, Lily was carried upstairs to bed. They tucked her in under a warm quilt in her new room. She clutched her stuffed bunny, while Rebecca placed the Goodnight Moon book on the nightstand within reach. "Good night, sweetie. We're right down the hall," Rebecca said, kissing her forehead. Daniel gently ruffled Lily's hair. Lily murmured a drowsy, "Good night," as her parents left a small nightlight on and backed out of the room, leaving the door open a crack. Sometime after midnight, Rebecca stirred awake. The rain had stopped. The house was extremely quiet until she heard a faint thump from above. Her eyes snapped open in the darkness. She held her breath, listening. A moment later, very faintly, it sounded like a footstep creaking on a floorboard overhead, right above their bedroom ceiling, where only the attic was. Rebecca nudged Daniel awake. "Do you hear that?" She whispered. In the hush, both of them listened. At first, only silence. Then soft humming of a lullaby tune. A gentle humming drifted through the ceiling, a slow, old-fashioned lullaby. Rebecca's heart lurched. It sounded like an elderly man humming a tune to a child. Daniel threw off the covers, instantly alert. The humming faded after a few seconds. Concerned, Rebecca hurried down the hall to check on Lily. She pushed open Lily's door and peeked in. Lily was fast asleep, curled up peacefully. The Goodnight Moon book was now lying open on the nightstand, as if it had been read again and left there. Rebecca's mouth went dry. She was sure Lily had been too sleepy to reopen it. Daniel joined her, silently surveying the room. Everything was still and quiet now. The lullaby had stopped. Trying to stay calm, they returned to their own bedroom. Could it be an open window? A radio from a neighbor? Daniel whispered, grasping for an explanation. Rebecca, trembling slightly, replied, "I don't know." It sounded so clear. Neither wanted to say what they were both thinking, that someone or something was in the attic, singing a child to sleep. They spent the rest of the night lying awake, ears straining, but heard nothing more. The next morning, the house felt normal again, sun shining through the kitchen window, the smell of coffee brewing as Daniel and Rebecca tried to shake off the uneasy night. Lily was cheerful as she dug into a bowl of cereal. Rebecca gently asked, "How did you sleep, honey?" "Good," Lily chirped. "I like it here. After you and Daddy left my room, I heard the rest of the story." She said this brightly, as if it were the most natural thing. Rebecca and Daniel exchanged a quick look. "What do you mean, the rest of the story?" Daniel asked, keeping his voice calm. Lily swung her legs under the chair. "The man. He has a quiet voice. He read the next part of Goodnight Moon after Mommy stopped, and he hummed a song. It was nice." She paused, as if concentrating. "He said, 'Good night, children,' at the end. I think he thought I was one of his kids." Lily gave a little shrug and spooned more cereal. Rebecca felt a chill despite the morning warmth. Did you see this man?" Lily shook her head. "No, I was too sleepy. I just heard him. I think he lives in the attic." Daniel almost dropped his coffee. He mustered a smile for Lily. "Maybe you were dreaming, sweetheart. Old houses make funny noises that sound like voices sometimes." Lily frowned a little. "It didn't sound like just noises, but okay, Daddy." She finished her breakfast and skipped off to get dressed for the day. As soon as Lily was out of earshot, Daniel and Rebecca began a hushed, urgent conversation. "We both heard that humming," Rebecca said, voice tense. That wasn't a dream. Daniel ran a hand over his face. I know. And Lily hearing a voice say, "Good night, children?" It's not a coincidence. They debated possibilities. Could a real person be hiding in the attic, somehow getting in and out? The idea was terrifying, a flesh and blood intruder living above them. After all, the attic door was locked. But what if there was another entrance? Daniel decided to thoroughly check. He spent the late morning inspecting the house. The attic windows were sealed and dusty, clearly not opened in years. He tapped on walls and checked closets in case of a hidden crawl space. Nothing. The only way in or out of that attic seemed to be the locked door. There was no evidence of anyone physically sneaking around, no footprints in the dust, no disturbed debris near the attic hatch or eaves. Rebecca had another theory she was almost afraid to voice. Perhaps something supernatural was at play. The lullaby, the gentle voice, the book appearing, it felt like a ghost story come to life. Daniel was skeptical by nature, but even he couldn't explain what was happening logically. Rebecca picked up the Goodnight Moon book from the living room coffee table where she had left it. She ran her fingers over the inscription, "Property of Hawthorne Orphanage." The word orphanage lingered in her mind. Could this house have been connected to an orphanage? Lily's mention of the man thinking she was one of his kids struck a chord. "We need to find out what this place's story is," Rebecca said firmly. Daniel agreed. He remembered the elderly former owner had passed away years before the foreclosure. Perhaps that was Mr. Lorne? They hadn't paid much attention to the details at auction beyond the basic title transfer. That afternoon, Rebecca called the local historical society and library, asking if they had any records of an orphanage in Hawthorne or about their house. A librarian directed her to some old newspapers and town records. Determined to get answers, Rebecca set out to do some research while Daniel kept Lily occupied. At the town library, Rebecca pored over brittle old newspapers and municipal records. Eventually, she uncovered a series of articles from the early 1950s that revealed the house's past. Her heart pounded as the pieces came together. The Dutch colonial had once been known as the Lorne Home for Children. The proprietor was Edward Lorne, a retired schoolteacher. After World War II, he had opened his home to orphans and children who had nowhere else to go. A newspaper photo from 1952 showed a kindly-looking man in his 60s, thin white hair, round glasses, standing on the very porch of their house, surrounded by a cluster of smiling children. Rebecca read on, eyes widening. In late 1953, a serious polio outbreak struck the region. Small orphanages and group homes were closed by the state to contain the spread of disease. The articles described how Edward Lorne's beloved orphanage was shut down almost overnight. The children in his care were taken by authorities to hospitals and then reassigned to other foster homes and institutions. One article quoted Mr. Lorne, "I promised I'd always be here for them, to read them a bedtime story every night. I'll keep that promise, even if I have to wait forever." He was never able to get the orphanage running again. Edward Lorne lived alone in that big house for years afterwards, waiting and hoping his children might return. Neighbors recalled hearing him read stories aloud each night on his porch or by an upstairs window, as if the children were still with him. He died in the house around 1961, alone, with no family. After his death, subsequent owners apparently kept the third floor sealed, perhaps out of respect or fear of disturbing the past. Over time, the orphanage faded from memory, becoming just a ghost story for the locals. Rebecca's hands trembled slightly as she gathered the photocopies of these articles. It all fit. The man in the attic reading to Lily must be Edward Lorne's ghost, still trying to keep his promise. Lily had even said he thought she was one of his kids. That evening, after putting Lily to bed, Rebecca and Daniel sat at the kitchen table with the documents spread out. They spoke in hushed tones. "It's him," Rebecca said, tapping the old photo of Edward Lorne. "This is who's in our house." Daniel stared at the image of the gentle-faced man and shook his head in disbelief. It was incredible, but it made sense of everything. "He doesn't seem angry or harmful," Daniel said quietly. "He's just doing what he always did, reading bedtime stories." Rebecca nodded, though her eyes were full of sympathy. He was waiting for those children to come home for so long. Maybe when we moved in with Lily, he finally had someone to read to again. They realized with a mixture of awe and sadness that Edward's spirit had been lonely, bound to the house by the love he had for those kids and the promise he never got to fulfill in life. Lily's presence had given him purpose again. Now what? Rebecca asked. They had confirmation of what was happening, but how to proceed was another question. Daniel took a breath. We should try to communicate with him. Let him know we understand. Maybe even that it's okay for him to rest. Rebecca agreed. They decided that if the activity continued that night, they would acknowledge Edward Lorne directly, and perhaps even invite him to show himself or at least open the attic. It was a frightening thought, but they sensed in their hearts that Edward meant them no harm. If anything, he had been a guardian presence for Lily. With equal parts nervousness and determination, they prepared themselves for whatever might happen when the house grew dark and quiet again. That night, the house was silent around 11 p.m. as Daniel and Rebecca sat awake in their bedroom, waiting. The door to Lily's room was closed. She had fallen asleep after an extra bedtime story from her dad, unaware of her parents' plan. For a while, nothing happened. Then, just past midnight, a familiar gentle tune began to hum through the air. The gentle humming seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere, as if the very walls carried the sound. Daniel and Rebecca stepped into the hallway. The melody was clearer than ever, unmistakably coming from behind the attic door. Summoning courage, Daniel approached the sealed door at the end of the hall. "Mr. Lorne?" he called softly, voice respectful and a bit shaky. "Edward Lorne, we know you're here." The humming paused, drifting into silence. Daniel's heart pounded, but he continued. "We know what happened to you, to the children. We've read about the orphanage." His words hung in the still air. Rebecca stood just behind him, her hand on Lily's doorknob in case their daughter woke. Gathering her nerve, she added in a gentle voice, "Edward, thank you for looking after our daughter. Lily loves the stories. You have a wonderful voice." She swallowed. "You kept your promise. You read to them, even after they were gone." For a moment, the only sound was the slight rattling of an old heater vent. Then, from beyond the attic door, there was a single creak, like someone shifting their weight on tired legs, floorboard creaking under weight beyond a door. Daniel and Rebecca exchanged a glance. Slowly, the padlock on the attic door began to rattle. They stared, wide-eyed, as the rusty lock quivered and then, with a clunk, fell to the floor. Daniel stepped back instinctively as the door, now freed, creaked open on its hinges. Beyond the door lay a narrow staircase leading upward into darkness. A puff of cold, dusty air wafted out. At that moment, Lily's bedroom door opened down the hall. Lily peeked out, rubbing her eyes. She had awakened at the sound of the attic door. Rebecca scooped her up before she could wander toward the stairs. Instead of being scared, Lily smiled sleepily. "He opened it," she whispered to her mother. Indeed, it felt as if Edward Lorne was inviting them up. Daniel clicked on a flashlight and aimed its beam up the steep steps. "Stay right with me," he murmured. The family of three ascended together, the old wooden steps groaning under their weight. At the top was another door, already ajar. Daniel pushed it open, and Rebecca found a light switch on the wall. Incredibly, after a moment of crackling delay, an overhead bulb flickered to life, casting a dim golden glow over the attic. They gasped at what they saw. The attic was a perfectly preserved children's dormitory from a bygone era. The low-ceilinged room was lined with small wooden cots, 5 in total, each neatly made up with dusty, faded quilts. Tiny wooden chests sat at the foot of each bed, names painted on them in childlike lettering. Susie, Tom, Helen. Some names were too faded to read. Along the far wall stood bookshelves overflowing with old children's books, cloth-bound fairy tales, early readers, and picture books from the 1940s and 50s. A small desk nearby held stacks of yellowed paper and a few school supplies, as if waiting for a lesson that never resumed. In one corner, a vintage phonograph with a big brass horn rested on a side table, an equally old record still on its turntable beneath the needle. Lily's eyes were round as dinner plates, taking in the magical if dusty playroom. It was as though they had stepped into the past. Rebecca felt a swell of emotion, realizing this had been home to those orphans, Edward's children. Against one wall, by a high-backed burgundy armchair, there was something scratched into the plaster. Daniel approached and shone the flashlight on it. Rough letters spelled out a message, carved by a hand long ago. "I'll always be here. Come home soon." Rebecca touched Daniel's arm, both of them feeling the heartbreak in those words. Edward Lorne had etched his devotion and despair into these walls. Lily walked fearlessly to the armchair. On the small table beside it lay a pair of round-rimmed reading glasses and a few books. She recognized one of them by its green cover. "Good night, Moon," she said softly. Indeed, here was another copy of the same book, or perhaps the very one they found. Was it somehow returned here, or had this one never left? The thought was dizzying. The Harper family lived in the house for a few peaceful years after that night. Far from being frightened, they grew to appreciate the gentle presence that lingered in the attic. Sometimes they would hear soft footsteps above or a quiet creak of the rocking chair, and it was oddly comforting. Lily would even whisper, "Good night, Mr. Lorne," at bedtime, believing her unseen friend listened. Eventually, life changes meant the Harpers had to move away. On their final day in the house, they packed their belongings with bittersweet feelings. Lily, now a bit older, made one last visit to the attic to say goodbye. She left a small bouquet of wildflowers on Mr. Lorne's reading chair as a thank you. When they were ready to depart, Lily picked up her beloved Goodnight Moon to take with her. To her surprise, a slip of yellowed paper fell from its pages. Rebecca caught it and realized it was a note written in neat old-fashioned cursive. To Lily, "Thank you for letting me read again. Love, Mr. Lorne." Tears sprang to Rebecca's eyes as she showed Daniel and Lily the message. It was the closure they hadn't expected, but deeply appreciated. Lily smiled a little sadly and whispered, "You're welcome," hoping Mr. Lorne could hear. As they drove away, Rebecca glanced back at the house. For a brief moment, she thought she saw a figure in the attic window, a slender old man with round glasses, watching them leave. He raised his hand in a fond wave. Rebecca blinked and the figure was gone, leaving only the empty window behind. In the quiet that followed, the Harper family felt a mix of sorrow and peace. They knew Edward Lorne's lonely vigil had finally come to an end. He had kept his promise. He read to his children again, and now perhaps he could rest. Some hauntings aren't fueled by anger, but by love and the pain of promises unkept. Edward Lorne never hurt anyone. He simply waited, whispering bedtime stories into the dark, hoping someone would listen. And in the end, someone finally did. Not all ghosts want to scare you. Some just want to finish the story.
Every story has an end, but here, the mysteries never stop. Thank you for watching and being a part of this journey into the unknown. Your support keeps these stories alive, and there's plenty more waiting for you. We drop 3 new stories every week, so if you crave suspense, the unexplained, and the downright chilling, make sure you're subscribed and ready for what's next. Until then, keep your lights on, your doors locked, and remember, some stories stay with you long after they're told.